Welcome to Who Wrote That Up For You, a daily podcast that shines a light on the American justice system and its role in empowering the powerful to take from you. The justice system is the only branch of your government where an individual, rather than the collective, can make the system act for you. It puts power in the individual's hands, but it's broken and being used against you at a time when you need it most.
And welcome to Who Wrote That Up For You. I am Sonia Ebron, co-founder at Courtroom 5.
And I am Deborah Sloan, the other co-founder at Courtroom 5.
Great show lined up for you today. In a few moments, we will speak with Diego Acosta. He is a court interpreter operating in the Houston, Texas area. So we'll be excited to learn about the services he provides there. Before we get started, Deborah, what is on your mind today?
I want to talk about the difficulty of right now of if you're a plaintiff getting a defamation, winning a defamation court case. Um, right now, the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, is considering lowering the standards for proving your defamation case if you're a claimant, and in favor of basically getting rid of the current standard, which has been there for almost 60 years. The current standard is if you're going to accuse someone of a defamation, there are a couple of things you have to prove. And one of the biggest is actual malice or falsely falsely claiming something that you know is false, or reckless disregard for the truth. And basically, most of these defamation cases are against media outlets like the New York Times or whatever. As a public librarian, or as a former public librarian, I like holding up the First Amendment. And I think lowering the standards or weakening the standards that people have to prove defamation, it would be a detriment to free speech. And primarily, they want to do this for public figures, well-known public figures who are accused or who are accusing folk like the New York Times. An example is Sarah Palin, her defamation suit against the New York Times. And for me, I don't think that those standards should be reduced because of basically because of who you are, or because I feel very strongly in the First Amendment. So
Yeah,
that's where I am on that one.
it is getting tougher, it seems to me, across a wide variety of claims to prove your claims these days. The courts are becoming more difficult for people to access, whether you're a defendant or a plaintiff. And I think that's yeah, I'd agree with you. I think that's unfortunate. So hopefully the Supreme Court is in favor of the First Amendment and votes to uphold it and maintain the current standards there. So appreciate you bringing that to our attention. At Courtroom 5, we believe the courts belong to the people, in particular to the people who use them. And we, the people, are coming to claim our courts. So if you are in court without a lawyer, or you need to sue someone and can't find a lawyer to represent you, get yourself over to courtroom5.com, try a limited version of our services for free, and we hope to provide some relief for you there. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome onto the show Diego Acosta. Diego, again, is a court interpreter in the Houston, Texas area. Diego, thank you for joining us on Who Wrote That Up For You.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being with you today and share a little bit of an experience of what it is to be a court interpreter, especially for the Spanish language, which is my target language. So again, once again, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure being with you guys.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, let me ask you, share with our audience what a court interpreter does.
So, a court interpreter, what we do specifically in my field of expertise is we are experts in language, right? English and Spanish. And what we do is we help people who have a language barrier, who are in the need of accessing a fair trial or a fair judicial system, if that's a way to say it. We help them get over that barrier and be able to communicate and say what they need to say without having the worry of not being able to present their case or the statements because of this language barrier that we spoke.
Fantastic. And so if I am a Spanish speaker and I have limited facility, let's say with English, our courts require that there be some English only spoken. Is that correct?
That is correct. Once we go on the record, everything has to be in Spanish, right? I'm sure for the benefit of everybody. So normally, what we call the people who English is not their native language or they don't feel comfortable in English. We use the acronym LEPP, which means Limited English Proficiency Person. And this is a person who needs an interpreter. And again, we are there to facilitate that for them, make sure that everything is interpreted for them. And by interpreting, sometimes people might get it confused. It's translation, right? Basically, that's what it is. Difference between translation and interpretation is translation happens on a written document, and interpretation happens a message through voice, right, through words. So that's what we do. We do interpreting. We translate as well, but our line of work is interpreting, and we make sure that we explain that to them and give them information on how it works. That way, they know how to use it, because that could also be a challenge, right? If they don't know how to use the interpreter, it could pose a challenge for the person, the interpreter, and the court.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so if I have, as you say, limited English proficiency, is that something the court has to recognize, or do I have to prove that? How would I get you into my courtroom if I needed interpretation?
That is a great question. Well, normally, what happens is this is something that is set from before. But at times, there can be settings where the person feels that they are proficient enough in English to handle or take up on their case in English. And when they get to court and they start hearing everything that's going on, and the judge can tell that they're not understanding, or the mediator can tell that they're not understanding. So they will have a competency hearing, and they will determine if the person is competent to proceed in English or in Spanish. Normally, people know um, if they're proficient enough to proceed in English. And again, there's no shame in the game, right? Asking for an interpreter is probably your best bet, because if you have your doubts and hesitancies of how you're understanding the proceedings, um, more than likely better off, getting an interpreter or having the court get an interpreter. That way, there's um, nothing is being left out.
Yep. Understood. And so I'd want to probably handle that as the limited English proficiency person. I'd want that handled before I got to court, would be my guess. Are there
Yes.
forms to fill out, or do you know if there's a way of getting me designated? I would want you, if I had a court hearing and I couldn't speak English well, I'd want you there when I got there, right? Rather than having to rely on the judge or other folks to say, hey, this fellow isn't speaking very well, right?
Yes, yes. Normally, it's all a due process, right? Normally, they've been through some sort of screening, whether it's when they were detained, or if they're doing written statements or written declarations, and they ask the person, hey, you think you need an interpreter? Is it not? Then normally the court administrator handles that if they need to reach out to somebody. Remember, there's not only Spanish. Spanish is the biggest, or the second largest, most spoken language in the U.S. But after that, there are many other languages. Another language that is very big is Vietnamese, and Arabic, right? And these are languages where you can't get by with speaking un poquito de español, right? These are languages where sometimes there's no understanding between the people, especially here in Texas, where most of the people here speak Spanish. Even the people who are non from Hispanic families, a lot of the people here speak Spanish, um, just because it's a very big Spanish speaking community here in the area. So normally, a lot of the courts here in my area will have their own interpreters in the court. So in case somebody, there's something comes up, they didn't say that one of the witnesses would prefer Spanish, and now they're saying that they prefer Spanish. They normally have somebody in house in the courtroom that is available to help them out.
Got it. Got it. Fantastic. And so you mentioned that your specialty is in Spanish. Is there a licensing procedure there in Texas for court interpreters? And if so, what's that like?
There sure is. There sure is. The entity that handles the certifications is called the JBCC, um, and they are responsible for certifying interpreters, court reporters, um, and I believe it's the judicial branch of
County courts or something
county
like
court.
that?
It,
My
it's
guess.
it's it's the Texas it's the Texas entity that certifies it. So the process can be a little difficult, just because the tests are not easy. Um, I remember studying quite a bit to be able to pass the test. Obviously, experience is, like in any other setting, experience is the most helpful. Having that hands-on experience, right? So while I was preparing for the test, I was also having hearings during the day for my regular work, so that helped me out a lot. Being in Houston, you have to travel out to Austin. I'm guessing that it's the same for other states, that you have to travel wherever the judicial branch has their main office. We went into the judicial library right next to the Texas State Capitol, very very pretty. And you take the test. It's done in two parts. The first part is an oral examination where they evaluate your understanding of the court and the court settings and due procedure, that kind of thing, only in English. First, you're only tested in English, tested for synonyms, idioms, that kind of thing, things that you use in court every day. And then you go into the technical part of the examination, where they examine your language proficiency. So that's how you go about it. And then once you've taken the test, you get certified and you get put into a database where people who need the interpreter can reach out to you that way. And I think that is the easiest way that they have of reaching out to the interpreter.
Understood. Fantastic. Now, you have to not only demonstrate in that testing Spanish proficiency and English proficiency. Do you have to show any legal terminology proficiency? Do you have to understand certain terms?
Of course, of course. A lot of the studying goes through terminology, um, because it's something you have to be very careful. English and Spanish, for a person who speaks both languages, are very similar. They're very different, but they have a lot of things that are similar. Especially when you work, for example, in the medical field, a lot of the diseases and parts of the body, and they're very similar to English, but for the legal it changes. Um, some of the things are very different, and you have to be very careful the way that you say it. For example, um, when we use the word crime in English, crime could be anything from jaywalking on the street. But in the Spanish, if you use the equivalent to crime, which is crimen, which is only one word, one letter difference. You're just adding "n" towards the end of the word. Um, it means something more serious. Normally, when you say crime or crimen in Spanish, it refers or alludes to something as, like murder or something like that, right? So we use a different word when we're talking about small crimes, right? Which has, um, you know, not it's not a literal translation for the word crime, because we use delito, like delictive, right? We use delito, and it makes a difference. So these certain little things, you have to know. But more so of the legal terminology, I feel like one of the most important parts that they test you in, and that you have to know to put into experience, is knowing these regional colloquialisms, and these almost intertwined words, that because one place it can mean something else, somewhere else it can mean something different. So being able to take in the context, and giving the words a meaning, I think that that's where the test becomes very hard, because they try to be very, very nitpicky at seeing if you can understand context, and given that, rendering that message similarly to where it's going to reflect the same way in the other language.
Got it. Fantastic. And so I know you probably find yourself interpreting across a wide variety of types of legal matters. So criminal cases, variety of civil cases. Are there different types of interpretation services that might apply in one type of legal matter or another?
There is. Normally, the interpreters, we are prepared to work in any kind of setting. A lot of the times, we don't know what we're going for. So we kind of show up, and we are required to go with the flow. Um, but it, a lot of the interpreters get to choose what they like, and that's one of the beauties of being in this line of work, is you can kind of choose what you like. Um, I personally enjoy immigration. It's ever changing. Um, the people who you work with are trained to work with interpreters, so it makes your job easier.
Fantastic. It's a really interesting field for me because, again, the courts are English only. And so the only thing that gets reported, if you will, like by a court reporter, would be what you say. Not what the person, the limited English proficiency
Yes.
person says. And
Yes.
so you do have to get those
Yes.
idiosyncrasies absolutely right, because it's what you say that goes on the record. So would you talk to us about the process? I show up in court, and you, as the interpreter, show up. What are the mechanics there? How do you get connected? Is there equipment? What does it look like?
So it's very interesting that you point that out. That is one of the things that I am very, very careful with how I when I do my work, is being making sure that I am picking the correct translation for what I'm saying. Like you said, again, what we say is what goes on records. And many occasions, I've been in a courtroom where um, I know that sometimes I've used a synonym very similar to what the person has said, and the judge or whoever is speaking uses the same terminology that I used, when they could have chosen using another terminology, meaning exactly what you say, right? They are using and listening to exactly what we're saying. So you have to be really, really careful with that. That being said, different courtrooms have different procedures. Um, for example, with immigration court, they have their own equipment. The equipment normally consists of a microphone with a receiver. I'm sorry, with a transmitter, and which is what the interpreter wears, kind of something similar to what I'm wearing, only without the auricular part, because we don't need to hear, right. Our ears need to hear to whatever the English people are saying. So we only have a little device with a microphone, and then the other person does have the headset, and they're listening in real time what is being said. So as they start speaking, the translation starts going in simultaneously, just a couple of words behind what they're saying. But there are certain courtrooms that don't have their own equipment. Some of us interpreters have our own equipment, and it makes a world of a difference. To put matters into perspective, for example, if there is no equipment, sometimes the court wants to proceed in a consecutive manner. I don't know if we have talked about this, but the consecutive is it once the consecutive interpretation consists once the person has rendered the message that they want to transmit, the interpreter waits for them to finish the message in their language, and then we take in the message and we translate it after, right? That's being consecutive, one message after the other. Opposed to when you have the device, you could do it simultaneously, which is what I was saying before. You have the headset, you have, and they're listening to what you're saying. So that being said, the consecutive could take, if we're taking 30 minutes to take testimony, consecutive takes an hour because you're repeating over and over and over again. So having your equipment helps. If there is no equipment, there are other ways to go around it. There is an old French technique called charcutage, where we sit next to the person who needs the interpretation, and we basically whisper in their ear simultaneously what they're saying. That way, that they're listening in real time of what's going on, and you could shave some of that extra time that you would be in, doing a consecutive interpretation.
Good, good, good. And so we know, for instance, a court reporter, you only need one in a hearing or a trial. Are there instances where more than one limited English proficiency person is in the court needing to speak? And in those situations, are there more than one interpreters, or would you be the only interpreter interpreting or translating for everyone?
That is a excellent question. Normally, and again, with the court reporters, it's one, but with the interpreters, well, I guess I'll add some context. Normally, what we do is we're doing consecutive. We're doing a lot of retaining the message, right? Or simultaneous, we're doing a lot of quick, instant thinking and processing through our head. However, it's been known through studies that your attention span and your memory starts declining after an hour of continuous extenuous work, right? If you're putting your brain to work for a period over an hour, the quality of the interpretation starts diminishing. It's been proven by studies. So normally, what we do is we work in teams. So we'll work with two people, and what we do is we'll relay each other, right? So one person will be up on there for 45 minutes, and then we'll switch every 45 minutes. If I see that my colleague is getting stuck, it could be anything. Sometimes, we're thinking about what we have to go do after work, or and that it could slow you down, right? If you don't have your attention span completely into what you're doing, and it happens. It does happen, right? It's like any other job, opposed to the person sitting on the bench or sitting, this is not your livelihood. You're just there to work, right? It's just another day in the office, right? So it does happen. And then you kind of try to pick up on those cues. And if you see that your colleague needs to help, you kind of butt in and like, hey, my turn. And then, you give yourself kind of that rest. But it's better and it's best. The interpretation holds a better quality when you work in teams. Yes.
Absolutely. But when you're in the seat and there are multiple people who need translation, are you translating for both of them? Or does your partner or one of your colleagues handle one person and you handle another?
So normally what happens is the equipment you have, most of the time you have enough equipment for everybody.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you'll have maybe somebody in the jury that needs the interpretation. They get equipment. Maybe you have one of the witnesses needs equipment, and the defendant needs equipment. So you provide everybody with the equipment, and normally everybody's listening.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So, have you ever had a person who was limited English proficiency, but maybe thought they had enough to listen to you and maybe correct you? No, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant. Have you ever had that situation?
Yeah, that situation does happen a lot, but surprisingly, and I say that sarcastically, it's not the defendant. Guess who? It's the attorney, right? The attorney wants to throw the interpreter under the bus because maybe they're not getting the answers that they're expecting. For the most part, they just are objecting, and they'll object to the interpretation because they don't like the way that their defendant responded to whatever he was asked. But that's not the interpreter's fault. There are occasions where they'll object, and again, this is Texas, so a lot of them do speak the language, um, and sometimes it doesn't make sense that they are challenging your interpretation because sometimes you're using certain synonyms. Um, because at times, when you're working, and one word doesn't come up, you have to switch it out for another word. And maybe they're just not hearing the word that they wanted to hear because they want to follow up a line of questions along with that answer and they want it certain specifically said. So they do. For the most part, we have a protocol. We stand by interpretation, or if we believe that maybe there was a mistake or a misunderstanding, again, it does happen, we are human, we correct with them. When we address the defendant, we let the judge know, Judge, I'm going to clarify with the defendant what possibly could be the misunderstanding here, and see what's going on. So I clarify with them, and I tell the judge exactly what was said. The judge is, we go through the judge for everything. Judge here, judge there, right? Judge, can we tell this to the defendant? Judge, I'm going to tell this to the defendant, right? So you ask the judge, Judge, I'm going to ask them. You tell them, hey, I need to clarify what was said, or what wasn't said, and then you tell the judge, I clarified what was said, what wasn't said. The defendant responded this exactly, and that's where we're at. And normally, as interpreters, our work is to make sure that the message is delivered correctly. That way, it's being understood. So normally, as interpreters, and the person who's using the interpreter mistakes makes the mistake that the party has to understand what you're asking in order for you to feel or to think that you're doing a good job. But that's not necessarily correct, because at times you'll ask the question exactly how it was asked, and the person will answer what they want to answer, whether it's want to they don't want to answer directly to the question that they're being asked, or they understood the question in a different way and they're answering in a different matter. So that being said, being very careful with what you say is always very important. Um, Thinking about it, whether sometimes it's difficult to stop and think for a moment, because once you get into a flow, you know, and you kind of hesitate for a second, you make everybody hesitate, right? Did he say that right? Did he ask that correctly, right? Sometimes our hesitancy is more of making sure that we're being completely accurate, or we're not leaving anything out or adding something that may change the answer.
That is a hard job. That is it, but it's so important for someone to get a fair hearing or trial. Are there etiquette issues that people needing interpretation services should follow? What should you expect? What would I expect to have to do if I needed your services in a court hearing?
Well, normally, a lot of the people, they've never worked with interpreters before. Some of them have, whether they've been in immigration procedures, or, excuse me, or they've been to medical appointments where they need interpreters, which is mainly the places where the interpreters work. They know, they would know a bit of how to work with the interpreter. But normally, what I try to do is I try to explain to them before Hi, my name is Diego, and I'm an employee here with the court, and I am a translator. I don't use the word interpreter because I don't want to confuse them at times, right? Or I'll be, I am the interpreter, or in other words, I am the translator. We are going to be using this device here. This is how you turn on the volume. This is how you lower it. Kind of give them a little crash test course of how to use the interpreter. Normally, it's not an issue when the person doesn't pick up at all on the other language. It becomes an issue sometimes when they know a little bit of both languages and they're trying to understand both things at the same time, and they might get a little confused, right? So you tell them, you would rather Spanish, right? Let's keep it in Spanish. Let me do my work, make my job easy. Same thing with the other party, right? As not only the defendant but the other party as well. You kind of have to instruct them, hey, if it's human nature. If you give me a one paragraph statement that you want me to interpret word for word, do you think I am going to be more accurate if you give me the paragraph all at once, or if you give me the paragraph sentence by sentence? Right?
Right.
You know,
Sentence by sentence. Yeah.
sentence by sentence, you're going to keep almost the exact precision at 100%. Where the paragraph, they're going to, my brain automatically, whether I take notes, it's going to summarize at parts, or I'm going to use a different word. So again, we tell them that, right? And then the etiquette goes inside and outside of the court, right? We don't, for example, I don't get into arguments with anybody. We were talking about the lawyers. I've been in situations where the lawyer's like, hey, no, that's not what my client said. And I'm not going to sit there and argue with them. I tell the judge, this is what was said. I stand by my interpretation. If there's some sort of disagreement, you can go back to the recording. And if there's a mistake on my end, you own the mistake, and you correct it on the record. The interpreter needs to make a correction, and you correct your error on the record. Again, a lot of the times, I've had people when we step out of court. I'm going to the restroom on my break, and they follow me into the bathroom because they want to ask me what's going to happen next, or what do I think the judge is going to say, or what should I, right? Obviously, these are big no-nos for us, right? And it can be difficult, right? Especially if it's somebody. Spanish is a big well spoken language, but like some colleagues, speak languages that are very native to certain areas, and when these people hear somebody speaking their language, I mean, their eyes just poof, they light up. Oh my God, somebody! And then they hear that accent that they're maybe from the same region that they're from, right? I mean, they feel compelled, obviously, to go speak to the person, right? But as interpreters, we need to limit that, right? Because at times we do have a lot of knowledge of how the court procedure works, and conversation can lead up into something that could be misunderstood for trying to prep the client, or trying to coach them, or giving them legal advice. And we try to keep away from that, because that could end up in a disqualification from the court.
Absolutely, absolutely. What you do is very difficult. It sounds like to me, and but very, very valuable. So glad to know that people have services like this. Court is intimidating enough for folks who do speak English well, and so I can only imagine the comfort you provide for those who don't. Diego, thank you so much for the work you do and for sharing your knowledge here on Who Wrote That Up for You.
Of
Wish you
course.
continued success in your career. We'll be in touch soon.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I'm available if you guys need anything else. Interpretation services as well. So,
Appreciate your work.
you guys have a good day, and thank you for having me once again.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
That is
Wow, that is
fantastic.
so
Yeah, it
fascinating.
is. That's a hard job, and I can imagine the training that's required to do that on a regular basis. So fantastic. Well, Deborah, who won? Rather, what is the solution to your last quiz, and what do you have teed up for us next?
Well, it was a really easy question. A motion to eliminate can end your case on the merits. No, it can't. It's false. That is false. A motion in limine is basically trying to keep certain evidence out of court pre-trial. So that has nothing to do with the merits of your case, really. Okay, so today's quiz: what does absolute privilege mean in a defamation case? We were just talking about defamation. So, what does absolute privilege mean in a defamation case?
That is interesting. I think we've run across that issue once or twice before. So fantastic. That's good. I'm looking forward to seeing the answer you have there, though, nonetheless. Great. Well, that is all we have for you today. Thanks as always for tuning in to Who Wrote That Up For You, and we will see you next time.
Are you feeling beleaguered, angry, or afraid, as if things are spinning out of control and you're powerless to stop them? It's easy to just let things slide and hope they don't get worse. But they often do get worse. The thing is, you're not powerless. Our courts belong to us, and their purpose is to give power to the powerless. Don't let your grievances pile up without redressing them. You can handle this in court. Or, if someone takes you to court, you can take them to school.